Dear listener, what if I told you that the Easter feast you've enjoyed your entire life is missing something? A dish so controversial, so politically charged, that powerful forces once tried to erase it from history entirely. Wind the clock back with me, and I'll show you how a simple, roasted meat became the centerpiece of religious conflict, imperial decrees, and cultural resistance. This isn't just dinner, my curious apprentice. It's drama. You see, while modern Easter tables might groan under the weight of glazed hams, roasted lambs, or perhaps those curious little marshmallow chicks, there was once another food that reigned supreme at this feast. The Paschal lamb? No, though that's what the history books want you to believe. I'm speaking of something far more divisive, the Easter beaver. Oh yes, you clever creature, you heard me correctly. For centuries across medieval Europe, beaver meat was the centerpiece of Easter celebrations. But why, you ask? Wind the clock back to the 8th century, when the Catholic Church faced a rather chewy theological problem. Meat was forbidden during Lent, those 40 days of fasting before Easter. But what exactly constituted meat? The Church needed clear rules. Fish was permitted, but land animals were not. Simple enough, one might think. But nature, my esteemed viewer, rarely adheres to our tidy human categories. The beaver, that industrious semi-aquatic rodent with the magnificent flat tail, presented a fascinating loophole. It spent much of its time in water, had a scaly tail, and seemed to sit somewhere between fish and beast. Come closer, friend. In 754 AD, the Archbishop of Mainz made a declaration that would transform Easter dining for centuries. He classified beaver as fish due to its aquatic tail and swimming habits. Suddenly, this creature became the perfect feast food for the Lenten season and Easter celebration. Clever medieval Catholics could now enjoy rich, gamey meat during times of religious restriction. Beaver meat became particularly associated with Easter celebrations, a special treat after the long abstinence of Lent. But not everyone was pleased with this arrangement. As my time traveling taste buds can attest, beaver meat is dark, gamey, and bears more resemblance to beef than to any fish that ever swam. The dish was typically prepared by soaking the meat overnight to remove the gamey flavor, then roasting it with herbs and serving it alongside spring vegetables. Now, my curious apprentice, let me tell you about the grand feasts of Easter in the 13th century monastery of St. Gallen in Switzerland. Historical records show that the monks there maintained extensive beaver ponds, not just for the occasional Lenten meal, but specifically to prepare for the grand feast that would break their long fast. The monastery's records speak of elaborate preparation methods where the beaver meat would be marinated in wine and herbs for 3 days before being roasted over applewood fires. The popularity of Easter beaver reached its peak in the 13th century, particularly in Germany, France, and Eastern Europe. Monasteries even began breeding beavers in their ponds specifically for Easter feasts. The tail, rich in fat, was considered the greatest delicacy, often reserved for the highest-ranking person at the table. The wealthy nobility developed their own traditions around the Easter beaver. In parts of Bavaria, historical accounts describe how beaver tails would be gilded with thin sheets of edible gold leaf for Easter banquets, a spectacular display of wealth and piety combined. Meanwhile, commoners made do with beaver stews, stretching the meat with spring vegetables and whatever herbs might be beginning to sprout. Are you ready for this, esteemed viewer? By the 16th century, the beaver population of Europe had been hunted to near extinction, not just for their meat, mind you, but also for their fur and castoreum, a vanilla-scented secretion used in perfumes and flavorings. Yes, you heard that correctly. Beaver secretions once flavored your ancestors' desserts. The medicinal uses of beaver parts further complicated our story. Medieval physicians prescribed beaver organs for everything from headaches to fertility problems. The tail was believed to strengthen the heart when consumed on holy days. Some monasteries even claimed that regular consumption of beaver meat would extend one's life, a convenient belief for those who enjoyed the taste. In the culinary annals of the Habsburgs, we find records of an Easter specialty called beaver, a rich stew of beaver meat, spring mushrooms, and early asparagus, served to break the Lenten fast. The Habsburg Imperial Kitchen records from 1487 detail how this dish required special preparation by the head chef himself, as it would be the first substantial meat the emperor would taste after 40 days of restriction. But then came the plot twist. In the midst of the Protestant Reformation, this curious Easter tradition became a battleground. Protestant reformers, looking to purge what they saw as Catholic excess and arbitrary rules, targeted the beaver, as fish classification as emblematic of religious contradiction. A beaver is plainly a furry beast, not a fish, they proclaimed. Martin Luther himself reportedly mocked the classification in his writings, stating that if we are to call a beaver a fish because it swims, then we should also call a farmer a fish when he bathes. The beaver dish became symbolic of Catholic rule, bending, and casuistry. Between us, dear listener, by the 17th century, powerful forces were working to erase the Easter beaver tradition. As Protestant influence spread across Northern Europe, the dish vanished from Easter tables. Catholic regions held on longer, but as beaver populations crashed, the tradition became increasingly impractical. Oh, you with the hungry mind. Would you believe that in 1650, Pope Innocent X was presented with a diplomatic challenge over the beaver question? French bishops petitioned for continued recognition of beaver as fish, while Spanish counterparts argued for stricter classifications. The Vatican's response was delightfully diplomatic. They acknowledged the historical classification while gently suggesting that Easter feasts might focus more on the bounty of actual waters going forward. And then came the most fascinating erasure of all, the historical one. As Easter traditions solidified in the 18th and 19th centuries around lamb, ham, and eggs, the memory of the Easter beaver faded from cookbooks, cultural references, and eventually, collective memory. Cookbooks from the early modern period show this transition clearly. A German cookbook from 1581 contains 6 beaver recipes for Lent and Easter. By 1680, a similar text from the same region mentions beaver only once, as a peculiar food of the ancients. By 1750, beaver recipes had disappeared entirely from mainstream European cookbooks. Oh, you clever creature. Isn't it curious how food history gets rewritten? By Victorian times, the idea of eating beaver for Easter seemed so strange that historians began to treat earlier references as metaphorical or mistranslated. The Easter beaver was becoming culinary apocrypha. But in remote areas of Eastern Europe, particularly Poland and Lithuania, traces of the tradition persisted into the early 20th century. In these regions, beaver tail soup remained a secretive Easter delicacy among certain communities who preserved the medieval knowledge, a whispered tradition passed from grandmother to grandchild. My time, traveling research reveals that in a small Lithuanian village in 1912, a local priest recorded what might be the last traditional Easter beaver feast in Europe. The village had maintained a small beaver colony for generations, harvesting just enough for their Easter celebration. The priest described how the entire village would gather after the Easter vigil to share the roasted meat, believing it connected them to their ancestors and brought special blessings for the spring planting. The final twist in our tale comes with modern conservation efforts. As European beaver populations recovered in the late 20th century, a few cultural historians and adventurous chefs attempted to revive the Easter beaver tradition, only to face fierce opposition from both animal rights activists and religious conservatives uncomfortable with this decidedly non-canonical Easter food. Taste, dear viewer, is memory in disguise, and sometimes that memory has been deliberately obscured. So this Easter, as you gather around your table laden with the acceptable modern symbols of the feast, remember the humble beaver, once the centerpiece of celebration, now erased from our culinary consciousness. Between us, dear listener, the next time someone tells you that traditions are unchanging, that this is how we've always done it, remember the beaver. Food history is not a straight line, but a winding river shaped by politics, religion, and the simple struggle for survival. What other culinary stories have been erased? What flavors have been forgotten? Speaking of erased traditions, did you know that the most popular Christmas dish in medieval England wasn't turkey or pudding, but something so bizarre that Queen Victoria herself issued a royal decree forbidding its consumption? The culinary annals suggest it involved an extinct bird, and a practice so peculiar that, but that, my brave culinary explorer, is a tale for another time.